Hello and welcome to the podcast Eat Better Food Today. I'm your host, Ken Coonahan, and I'm excited to be sharing insights on why we believe that health and longevity begins with the food we eat. The goal of this podcast is to inspire, educate, and enable folks to live a healthier life and do it affordably. My wife and I have been on this journey for over 10 years and continue to work on it every single day. Percent of the profits from this podcast we put towards child hunger, with initial focus on the poor suburb in America, East Cleveland, Ohio, which we just had our first event at a renovated center we're opening up there. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast. Subscriptions are the lifeblood of any podcast. On this episode, we're grateful to have Jeff Tkach, CEO of Rodale Institute. Jeff is on a mission to reconnect humans with the earth, which is a worthy cause, in my opinion. He's been responsible for leading the organization's growth, impact, strategic planning, and is committed to advancing the Institute's world-renowned research and education on regenerative organic agriculture. He leads a global workforce, advancing innovations in regenerative organic agriculture across the Institute's 10 campus operations in the U.S. and Europe, directing research investments. I'm happy to see Jeff, I'll say him kind of in person here since he was at New York City Climate Week back in September. Mm-hmm. So on this episode, we'll explore Jeff's thoughts on food, health, and longevity and discuss what continues to inspire him. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Ken. It's an honor to be here. I'm so glad you invited me onto the show.
Thank you. So my first question is always about food and something I believe is a great start to the day. So I always ask about what you had for breakfast this morning.
Great question. By the way, I think I really relate to the mission of what you and your wife are here to do, because I think that this topic that we're here to talk about today, regenerative organic agriculture, it's actually for everyone. It's for every person on the planet. And it's an exciting time to be alive because our moment is now. What did I have for breakfast? I actually had some pastured eggs from a farmer who I see every Sunday at my local farmer's market, Breakaway Farm. And he actually was doing some beef bacon. I never had beef bacon before, so I picked some of that up on Sunday, and I made bacon and egg frittata on Sunday, and I've been eating leftovers yesterday morning and this morning. So that's what I had for breakfast.
Nice. Any coffee with that?
Always, with a little bit of Ancient Nutrition collagen and a little bit of Laird creamer to boot.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Pretty standard for my morning. That's how I start every morning. No endorsements here, Ken.
Huh?
No endorsements. This is just straight up. These are the brands that I love.
Yeah, well, that's great. I think it's fantastic. So another important aspect of healthy eating is kind of what you have in your home pantry. So I'm just curious what you have, stocked in your pantry at home.
Yeah, well, my wife and I go to great lengths not to spend our money at national retail. So we try to keep all of our food dollars in our community to the best of our ability. So just about everything in our home comes from independent grocery stores and our local farmers market. And then here at Rodale Institute, we have a free employee CSA. So every week, our employees take a bounty of produce home from our farm. So I in my pantry, we're probably a little bit more European in our approach. So we don't try to stockpile food in our house. We like to buy things fresh on a weekly basis. With that said, there's good staples of grains and storables that are always there. I actually had a pretty significant health journey in my life. Over the past 8 years, I healed myself from a chronic illness, from severe Lyme disease. And I attribute most of my healing to following a pretty strict diet and really making food my medicine. So my diet is really focused on eating unprocessed whole food, no sugar, no dairy, no gluten. And that way of eating has really transformed my health and my life. So most of my pantry items are based on that kind of a diet.
Nice. So is that kind of how you got involved with the Rodale Institute? Is that kind of based on your past health experience, or that's kind of what set me on this path a couple of years ago? Is kind of a health scare that I had. So
yeah, it sounds like we have that in common. So I would say yes, that my health collapse in 2016 was the major catalyst for me. Sort of having the guts of leaving a pretty lucrative job in the for-profit sector to joining the nonprofit Rodale in 2017. I had been on this journey for most of my adult life. I worked in the media industry, and I worked for about 15 collective years for the Rodale family. The Rodale family started both the Rodale Institute in 1947, but also a for-profit media company called Rodale Incorporated in 1942. So I spent most of my early adult life working through the publishing industry, and that's where I came to know the mission of the Rodale Institute. And frankly, it was kind of love at first sight, but it took me a long time to get the courage to walk away from all the promises that corporate America was offering me at the time to dive into the deep end of what I'm doing today.
Nice, nice. So how did the Rodale Institute get started? What's the genesis of that organization, I guess?
Sure. The founder of the Rodale Institute, J.I. Rodale, started our organization in 1947. He was not a farmer. He was not a scientist. He was actually a wealthy entrepreneur from New York City, but he had a lot of health issues, something I could relate to. He had chronic health issues from a young age, and he came from a family of unhealth. His father and his uncles actually didn't live past the age of 57. That was sort of the median age of his family. So he was looking out into the future, and he thought, you know what, I want to beat the odds. And so he kind of went on his own quest to understand longevity and health. And it led him to buy a farm in the late 1930s when he had enough wealth to leave New York City. The first thing he did was bought a farm, because he felt that if he could control how his food was produced, he intuited that would lead to health and longevity. So he buys this farm and starts asking all the experts about how to farm. Now, this is a guy who wore suits like 7 days a week, so just trying to paint the picture here. But as he would talk to these agricultural experts across the state and around the nation, they were all telling him about these amazing innovations in agriculture that were happening at that time. And it was all about chemical agriculture, as you know. So he was unsatisfied with what he was learning, and he just felt that no one could explain to him how these new innovations in agriculture that involved petrochemicals could actually produce healthy food. No one could make that correlation or that connection. And so he thought, you know what? He was actually saying to the rest of the world, hold up, let's take a pause here and let's really explore if going down this chemical path is going to lead to a healthier future for humanity. He didn't think it would. And so that led him on his own search that ultimately he was studying biological agriculture, which he coined organic farming in 1942. And then in 1947, he took profits from his publishing company and he started the Soil and Health Foundation, which was the original name for the Rodale Institute. And our work was really centered on connecting soil health with human health through science. And that to this 77 years later, that's still the mission today.
Wow. So he coined, did you say 1942 organic farming?
Yeah, most people credit J.I. Rodale with coining the term organic agriculture. Funny enough, along came his son, Robert Rodale, in 1971. Robert Rodale coined the term regenerative agriculture. So the Rodale family, you can credit them to this phenomenon that's happening in our culture today around regenerative organic agriculture. That all comes back to Rodale.
Because I've been hearing about organic for maybe 2 decades personally, and then regenerative is not something I've heard a lot of until the last couple of years. So I mean, it's kind of I had no idea the genesis of that whole the word, and then the concept has been around that long. I guess that's surprising to me, because you're just starting to see packaging with regenerative on it. You didn't see that, at least I didn't see it 2 years ago.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So it seems to be, so that's a good thing. So I guess let's start with, how do you define organic and how do you define regenerative or organic regenerative? I mean, they're kind of, you're saying them together, your website has them together, but I don't normally see, they're usually 2 separate words, like even on packaging, it's organic or regenerative. It's not organic regenerative.
Yeah. Yeah. Rodale defines both the words organic and regenerative with stringent standards. Okay. And frankly, that's the problem. That's the problem in our food industry today. Is there's a lot of greenwashing happening around the word regenerative. That word, in and of itself, buyer beware for any consumer that buys a product labeled regenerative, without absent of the word organic. 58 of the world's top 100 food companies today have a quote regenerative ag strategy. And by the way, most of those companies do not take a hard stance on the complete eradication of chemicals from their farming system. So Rodale, again, we helped start the National Organic Program in 1990. That's when our USDA passed legislation that led to the creation of a USDA organic standard. The organic standard is housed under the National Organic Program inside of the NOP, under the USDA. And that is a very, very rigorous time-tested standard. So whenever a consumer is buying at the grocery store and they see that USDA organic logo, they can trust that. It's actually one of the most trusted and stringent certifications in the food industry. And then over the last couple of years, we began to see this word regenerative appear. And so Rodale believes that agriculture is actually a continuum, right? So over here on the left, you have conventional farming, which is really chemical agriculture. There's nothing conventional about that, but we call that conventional farming. And over the last 10 to 20 years, we began to see farmers adopt practices like reducing their tillage or planting cover crops. That's essentially what large-scale farming is calling regenerative. So conventional, regenerative, and then further down the continuum is organic. The organic certification requires that farmers completely eliminate the use of any synthetic pesticides, herbicides, or insecticides in their farming system. So no chemicals are allowed in organic agriculture. It's governed by the USDA. It has a very strict auditing process, and consumers can trust that. And then the furthest down on the continuum is what Rodale calls regenerative organic agriculture. That's sort of the North Star. And Rodale, with partners such as Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's, came together about 7 years ago, and we co-authored what is now the newest and highest bar standard in farming, which is called the ROC certification. So that's what Rodale is saying is the highest bar today in our food and farming industry. And that standard is also audited. Every brand that has the ROC standard on package must meet the USDA organic standard as a baseline. And then above that, we're asking farmers about soil health, animal welfare, and social fairness. And so that's what comprises that standard.
Huh. Okay, I'm getting an education here. Okay, I thought I knew a lot, but I'm learning a lot this morning. So thank you. So let's talk, like, kind of when you talk about regenerative, organic, kind of just let's talk about some of the basics here. So soil health. Why is soil health? You even have something on your website. There's two, clumps of soil that somebody's holding in their hand, and one is conventional, and one is regenerative organic. So talk about soil health and kind of the context we're talking about here.
Rodale's work comes back to J.I. Rodale's original thesis that he wrote in May of 1942, where he said that healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. That was his guiding principle to what led him to start this work. And today that continues to guide everything we do. So Rodale believes that human and planetary health start in the soil. How we treat the soil, how we farm, says everything about human health outcomes. In fact, I believe that the chronic disease epidemic that we're facing in mass proportions as a society today can be directly linked to a collapsed ecosystem. We've actually decimated our farming systems by how we treat the soil with chemical industrial agriculture. And so what Rodale is doing is trying to point us back to say, our health begins in the soil. How we farm and how we farm soil matters to our ability to thrive on this earth.
So let's talk about cover crops. How do cover crops, crop rotation, composting, no-till, these are kind of all terms, I guess. What are the advantages of doing this versus the alternative is conventional chemical-based agriculture?
Yeah, by the way, you just rattled off the three main tenets of regenerative organic agriculture. So cover crops, crop rotations, and compost. Yeah. That's really the three biological mechanisms that improve the health of the soil. And so what Rodale is saying is that over our long-term science, we do science here at Rodale on all of our campuses, but our longest running experiment is 45 consecutive years. It's called the Farming Systems Trial. It was started in 1981 to compare conventional row crop farming with organic, so corn, soybeans, the predominant farming system in America. Rodale has been studying both the conventional way of doing that and the organic way of doing that over 40 years. And what we are learning through that long-term science is that organic agriculture over the long term is far superior to conventional. So we can increase yields between 3 and 6%. We can increase yields up to 30% in the organic systems, especially in years of extreme weather events. The yields are about equal over the long term, but when we see drought or extreme rain, we actually see dramatic increases in yields in the organic systems because the soil is more resilient. It's built for extreme weather. Number two, we're doing that while using 45% less energy in the organic systems, we're releasing fewer or no chemicals into the groundwater or into the air. And we are delivering between 3 and 6 times more profit to the bottom line of organic farmers. So these systems are more resilient, they're more ecologically sound, and they're ultimately more profitable. And that's the misnomer, is like the promise of large-scale chemical agriculture is so short-sighted, but you have to look at these systems over multi-decades to really understand the differences in biology versus chemistry.
But the argument for conventional is, well, I can't control my pests if I go organic. I can't control the weeds if I go organic. I need, because I just, my wife just sent me an article this morning. Like in Ohio, 8% of the farmers are regenerative, organic. That means 92% are conventional. And the argument is, well, I need to control my pests. I need to control the weeds. I can't do that with organic farming. That's
Well, first of all, when we talk about land use in the United States, like land use for agriculture, we don't have the full picture. Most of our cropland in the United States is used to grow corn and soybeans for the commodity market, right? So that's not even food that ends up on our plates. You and I don't sit down to a bowl of genetically modified corn or soybeans every night.
Our cows do.
Yeah, most of those crops go either into the ethanol market, industrial applications, or to animal feed. And that's a massive percentage of land. Again, Rodale has proved that we can do that. If we still believe in that commodity-based system, which I would argue we should really question, if we still want to grow large-scale grain, Rodale has proven at scale that we can do that. We can manage weeds and we can manage pests using biological methods while delivering more profit to the farmer. So we've proven that. Not just here in Pennsylvania, but we've proven that across the country. And there's many examples of large-scale grain farmers that are adopting the organic no-till system with success. So we control weeds with cover crops and with tillage, and with the crown jewel is sort of the organic no-till method, which means that we're not disrupting the soil. We're using green cover for weed management as well as for nitrogen, and we're doing it successfully. So anyone who argues that, I immediately point, we have many, many examples where that's just simply not true. However, back to the land use piece, I recently learned from a friend from a pretty credible source, that if you stop looking at our farmland from that commodity-based system, and you look at what's called specialty crops, which is funny because that's what in our food industry we call specialty crops. The fruits and vegetables that you and I actually eat, we call them specialty crops. In California, where most of our fruits and vegetables for America are grown, 44% of all specialty crop land is now certified organic. But that's actually a pretty significant tipping point if you think about it.
So how do we, I guess this is something that's bothered me. So we, I kind of listened to New York Climate Week, kind of the different conversations there. And then my wife and I were privileged enough to get invited to an event in DC that was hosted by Alice Waters. So she's.
Oh, you were there? I was invited to that too, but I wasn't able to make it.
Oh, so, she's trying to get more farm to school, call it farm to table, which, she started decades ago. But the argument that I hear, I was talking to director for nutrition at one of the large universities in the US here. And she's just saying, I can't get enough fresh produce to feed my students on a daily basis. So I can't go to local farms. I have to go to, the larger organizations, conventional crop grown organizations to get my produce. So what are your thoughts on, do you agree with that, disagree with that? Because we're talking about most of the land is for stuff we don't eat. So,
well, the flaws in our food system do not begin and end on farms. The flaws in our food system are much more systemic. You have to look at the whole ecosystem of how we grow, process, and distribute food. So we've built a national food supply, or we've actually built a global food supply chain. So we've become reliant on a global food shed, which is really fractured and broken. So for a farm in Ohio to grow specialty crops or certified organic vegetables and distribute it into your school lunch program, that farmer depends on a supply chain, a processing facility, someone to wash and pack and distribute that food, someone to commit to that farmer and pay them a long-term lucrative contract. So there's a lot of points in that system that go beyond the farmer. And so we have to look at the whole ecosystem. With that said, there's incredible organizations out there that are building resilient regional food sheds. There's an organization called 4P Foods based in Virginia that is doing an incredible job. And I encourage you to talk to their founder and bring him onto your show. But 4P has built a food shed. It's serving the Eastern Seaboard, and it's aggregating local organic fruits and vegetables from farms, and they're bringing all that into distribution centers and keeping it within a regional supply chain. So yeah, it depends on where you are in the United States, but there's many successful models that are breaking the cycle and that are overcoming some of the barriers that go beyond the farm.
Okay. Well, it's something that I'm going to try to, I had my first sponsor for the show. It's an organization, Cleveland, called Cleveland Kitchen. They make sauerkraut, pickles, kimchi, all that kind of stuff. They're all over the U.S. in stores.
Cool.
One of the things I'm trying to solve with them is because they've got a distribution network. They need a lot of cabbage, they need a lot of pickles and such. And how do you get more? Kind of what Alice is trying to do. I'm going to try to start doing with a couple local schools here in Cleveland first. So in the center and East Cleveland's part of that. So just try to how do you cut out the middleman and just get direct farm to school? So,
yeah, well, the good news is there's organizations like Alice Waters that are doing it, and that are, Chef Ann Foundation is another great example based in Colorado. There's aggregators, there are institutional procurement programs that are bypassing that middleman and putting more money back into the pockets of farmers. So we have plenty of good examples to point to.
So how do we get more farmers, more people interested in farming? Because that's one of the things I hear as well, is that, farmers are getting older, their kids don't want to go into farming. So, it's kind of, everybody knows how to buy stuff in a grocery store. They kind of don't understand the basics, kind of like what we're talking about here, how it gets started, where it comes from. So how do we get more people interested in doing this, I guess?
That's the question of our time. That's the question for our generation, Ken. So there's a massive gap in workforce coming, right? So over the next 10 years, 10 million acres of farmland are going to change hands in the United States. The average age of the American farmer is 59. And we're seeing more and more young people leave the family farm and go off to the city in pursuit of other career opportunities. The reason I think predominantly for that is because they're watching their parents struggle with this commodity-based system. How do you convince a young kid to come back, to go off to the land grant, to learn? The land grant system, as you know, is a system in the United States where that was set up by Abraham Lincoln under the Marshall Act in 1864. Every state in the nation has a land grant university that's studying agriculture, and it's doing science and education for the conventional farming system. So over the last 50 to 70 years, we've seen the land grant system become co-opted by the chemical companies. If you go to Iowa State, you can see the Monsanto library, not to pick on Iowa State, but if you go land grant to land grant, you see where these endowments are coming from. They're coming from the agrochemical companies. And they're indoctrinating these young kids at a young age and teaching them the chemical playbook. They're teaching them the chemical science so that they could go back to the home farm and perpetuate that system. And how would you get a young kid excited about a playbook that involved spraying toxic chemicals and then taking your crops to a mill at the end of the season to be paid a price that you don't set for yourself? So right now, conventional corn is selling for $3.50 a bushel in 2024. Organic corn is selling for $11 a bushel. So therein lies the opportunity. I think we need to inspire the next generation of farmers to embrace regenerative organic agriculture. At Rodale Institute, we do three things. We do science, consulting, and education. And so we have a robust national or international farmer training program. And every year we have a cohort of students that come to our main campus in Pennsylvania and spend 9 months learning the ins and outs and in-depth education around regenerative organic agriculture. These young students, in most cases, are coming from first-generation farm families. So they're saying, Mom and Dad, I don't want to go to university to be a doctor or a lawyer. I believe that I want to give my life to something greater than that. I want to produce food, and I want to be an organic farmer. You can almost imagine how that conversation goes around the kitchen table, where the parent says, well, where do you go to get an education to become an organic farmer? And the good news is Rodale is filling a massive void that the land grant system has created for these young men and women. And so every year we have these most inspiring, smart, highly educated, 50% male, 50% female typically. So you have a lot of young men and women that are saying, I want to be a first generation farmer, but I want to do it way more innovative than the land grant system can teach me.
Nice. So what about the financial piece? Because I also hear, well, I don't have the finances. I don't have the, money, especially for a young person that wants to get into farming, to buy land, buy equipment, et cetera. How do we solve that problem, I guess?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So again, how do you get a young person into large scale commodity farming when it's so capital intensive, right? You need millions of dollars to buy land and equipment. So I think the opportunity that regenerative organic farming presents is that we can teach young men and women how they can build a successful farm business on just a couple acres. The methodology we teach at Rodale is called market farming. So it's highly intensive, very profitable, small scale agriculture that gets them in the game. And then we teach them to scale up from there while they build their capital. Secondly, as we see all this land change hands in the coming years, there's an opportunity to apprentice young men and women that want to get into large-scale organic agriculture. There's awesome companies out there like Iroquois Valley, Belltown Farms. There's a lot of private funding that's flowing into private capital that's flowing into acquiring farmland, transitioning that land to organic, and it's trying to meet the demand. I mean, right now, our 6% of our food supply is certified organic, yet only 1% is produced here in the United States. So we're a net importer of organic food. And as all of this land changes hands in the coming years, there's an opportunity to place young men and women on that land to apprentice, to build their farm business, and then to give them a pathway to ownership. Iroquois Valley is an amazing model to look at. Rodale actually, we invest in Iroquois Valley, a very modest amount of our endowment, but they're a real estate investment trust that is buying conventional land, transitioning it to organic, giving affordable leases to organic farmers, and then giving them a pathway to ownership.
Nice. Yeah, in Cleveland here in the Cuyahoga Valley, we have a Cuyahoga Valley National Park. They actually have parcels of land that if you write a successful business plan, they will let you do like a 99-year lease to take that land. It's like 25 to 30, maybe 50 acres that you can then farm. So that kind of eliminates the upfront cost other than, equipment you're going to need and so forth, and seeds and such. But that's kind of a program. I don't know how long it's been in existence, a couple of decades here in Cleveland. So.
And frankly, there are models like that all over the country we can point to.
Okay.
Which is awesome.
So let's talk about health for a second, because you just talked about 1% of the organic, which I didn't know that either, comes from the U.S. versus we have to import the balance. Things that I've read and other conversations I've had on this podcast talk about when your local food is more nutrient dense, and the further it travels, the less nutrient dense that food is. So that's from a health standpoint. And then the doctor's way of solving that is to either give you some kind of medication or a supplement, because the nutrient density of our food is not what it used to be, say 40, 50 years ago. So that's a problem as well. If you're not doing local, you're doing things from a long distance. It's not as beneficial. There was one farmer I talked to, he said, what you could eat, like a head of broccoli 50 years ago, you'd have to eat I forget what he said, 20 heads of broccoli to get the same nutrients that you would have gotten 50 years ago. The question is, how do we change that, I guess?
Yeah. 6 years ago, Rodale started another long-term trial called the Vegetable Systems Trial here in Pennsylvania. And this is a side-by-side comparison of specialty crops, so vegetables that you and I sit down to dinner to eat every night. And we're studying conventionally produced produce against organic, two different systems over a long term. And what we are learning through that study is that how we treat the soil impacts the nutrient quality of the food. So our industrial vegetable farming practices over the last 30 to 50 years have begun to degrade the health of the soil such that the nutrients are not making their way into the food. So in summary, that's what we found in our first 6 years of this study, that the organic systems are enabling more nutrient uptake into the food itself. But again, it all goes back to how we treat the soil. And what Rodale is learning through that science is unlocking best practices for vegetable growers. So we're actually, we're uncovering different types of weed management and tillage methodologies that help uptake more nutrients, as opposed to spraying harmful pesticides and herbicides that are killing the life in the soil.
So you work with farmers in the U.S. and Europe. So you're not just a U.S.-based organization. So you kind of talked a little bit about your training in Pennsylvania, the 9-month program, but what are you doing on kind of, I guess, local bases, both here in the U.S. and overseas? That's one question. Then two is, what differences do you see between the U.S. and Europe from a farming practice standpoint?
Yeah, I should also give a quick shout out to our partners in Kansas. So we recently partnered with a university called Kansas Wesleyan, which, if you look on a map of the United States, Salina, Kansas is dead center in the United States. It's where 80% of America's wheat is grown, yet they import 90% of their food into the state of Kansas. So Kansas is a farming state.
Yeah.
But they import food that you and I consume. Their state is facing major supply chain threats because of that, as well as chronic illness and obesity is on the rise in the state of Kansas, because people living in Kansas don't have access to fresh, healthy, organic food.
Wow.
And so through an innovative partnership at Kansas Wesleyan, which is not a land grant, Rodale is actually going to be bringing our Rodale Institute farmer training to Kansas. So we'll now have 2 locations to train the next generation of farmers. Beginning in 2025, students can enroll at KWU and go through a degree program. They can not only train under the auspices of Rodale, but then they can get a 4-year degree. And Kansas Wesleyan is essentially trying to create a regional food system. So when those students graduate, they're going to be given access to an incubator farm. There's a 4,500 acre farm located just outside of Salina, where students will be able to get their farm business started and get access to equipment and capital and land. And so that's one example of where Rodale is really trying to replicate and scale our education. In addition, Ken, we started a model called Regional Resource Centers about 7 years ago. So Rodale essentially is regionalizing our science, and we now have research campuses in Georgia, Iowa, California, Washington State, and Italy. So we have our first campus in Europe through an innovative partnership with a company called Davinus. So we know that farming in Pennsylvania is different than any other region. Farming varies from region to region. And we want to take our science into these corners of the world where agriculture is most challenged, and prove out in that region that it can be done using regenerative organic methodologies.
Very cool. Very cool. So what about U.S. versus Europe? Any thoughts there from a farming practice? You have the place in Italy. I think you have another place in Europe, right?
Just one in Europe. We have a campus in Parma, Italy. Okay. And what I would say is that agriculture faces its challenges and opportunities in every corner of the world. So, I think through our partnership with Davinus, we have set up a research campus in Parma, and we are showcasing to farmers across Italy how they can begin moving towards a regenerative organic system. Through our one research campus, in the last 12 months, we've gotten 14 farms in the region certified to regenerative organic. So you could see that these campuses become almost like a beacon or a lightning rod for other farms in the region to learn from and to adopt best practices.
I mean, are you seeing like a play, I guess any U.S. or Italy, wherever, but farmers, another concern I hear from farmers is we want to do regenerative organic. We can't afford the certification process. So they're following kind of a regenerative organic process. They're not using any chemicals. They're not, they're not tilling, et cetera, but they haven't done the certification to, get that USDA stamp that you mentioned. So
both for the to achieve your USDA organic certification or your regenerative organic certification, both of those standards have what's called a cost share. So through the USDA, farmers can apply for funding to get subsidized for their certification. So anyone that says that they can't afford it is just simply not doing the work. There is funding available to offset expenses. The Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is the governing body of the ROA standard, has a cost share as well. And so in addition, Rodale launched a national consultancy 4 years ago, where we now have a team of full-time employees that are based across the United States. And their job is to work all day, every day to help farmers overcome any barrier or challenge to get their certification. So Rodale can offer that service for free to farmers. And so the farmers can literally call Rodale and we'll put them in touch with a consultant, and our consultant will guide them step by step through the certification process. So we've removed every barrier and every excuse that would keep a farmer from achieving that certification.
I may have a few Ohio farmers call you.
Send them our way.
So I'm just curious about your relationship. When you were on the panel for New York Climate Week, you were on a panel with John Piatti from American Farmland Trust. Do you guys work together in what your activities are? You work separately? What's kind of the relationship there, I guess?
It's a new and emerging relationship. John's a great guy and a great leader, and Rodale recently partnered. This is the first time I'm publicly announcing this, but Rodale will be partnering with the American Farmland Trust and a major movie production, which I will remain nameless for now. There's a movie coming out on National Geographic and Disney Plus in early 25, and Rodale and American Farmland Trust are partnering to create a national curriculum for students and teachers to indoctrinate them in the concepts of regenerative organic agriculture. So this will be the first publicly available national school curriculum designed to impact young kids and get them thinking about how they can embrace regenerative organic food and farming for the rest of their life.
Wow.
We're very proud of this partnership.
Very cool. I don't know, have you ever worked or heard of Will Harris down in Georgia?
Will's a great friend of Rodale. Will was here with us in September for a week. We have a great partnership with White Oak Pastures, and we're some of our students get sent to White Oak for additional education and vice versa. So we know Will, we love Will, and we believe deeply in what he's doing.
Yeah, and I mean, he went from, as you know, but I just for benefits of the audience here, I mean, he went from traditional to regenerative agriculture, and I mean, the soil is retaining its water, the animals are happy, he's getting wildlife back that was never there, the town that was dying, he's now gone from a town of 30 to 170, he's got over 170 employees in his company. I mean, I did a podcast with him. I call it Midwest Miracle. I mean, it's just amazing what changing from traditional to regenerative agriculture has done for him, his farm, and the community.
Yeah. No, Will is an incredible example of a success story. And you know what? If you really look hard at what Will did, that made him where he began his work was by starting with the health of the soil. That was his transition away from conventional farming. Was he put his emphasis and energy on soil health, and that was sort of the guiding principle of Rodale.
So any other success story you can share other than Mr. Harris here that somebody you worked with?
Countless. I mean, that's the beauty of Rodale, is where we see the success stories every day. And I'll go as far as to I'm pointing to the neighbor here. So about 1,000 yards from where I'm sitting in my office is the border of our farm. There's another 48-acre Mennonite dairy that is farmed by the Burkholder family. And James inherited that farm when he married his wife Ida, and they started conventional dairy, where his cows never saw the light of day. And this was in the early 2000s. His cows lived in a barn, and they were milked and raised on forage that was grown using conventional practices. And he was going bankrupt, frankly, and he grew very emotionally depressed because of the challenges he was facing in conventional farming. And so through an innovative partnership here at Rodale, we were able to apply for an NRCS grant, and we fenced in our entire 386-acre farm. And in 2013, those cows were released from the barn off into pasture, and he was able to expedite his transition to organic from 3 years to 1 year because Rodale's land was already certified organic. So he began grazing his cows on Rodale's land. We began to document the changes in our soil health on our farm through pasturing, grazing dairy. And in 2013, he began to turn around his business. He started shipping his milk to Organic Valley. And by 2019, 6 years into the journey, he started leasing up every acre of land across the county that he could to grow organic grain. And he then bought a dilapidated grain mill. And within a couple of years, he was doing about $2 million in gross sales by starting a local organic feed mill. And last year he left. He actually moved to Michigan because he became so profitable in organic agriculture that he wanted to expand his operation and be able to buy up more farms for his kids. So he would tell you, James would tell you, that everywhere I looked in conventional farming, I saw nothing but a dead end. everywhere I looked in organic agriculture, I saw opportunities for innovation and expansion.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
I'm looking to our neighbor for my closest example, but I could give you countless more examples like that one.
Very cool. Very cool. Food. So we kind of talked about soil health, organic farming, regenerative farming, but food in this country, which I'm sure you're aware of. I mean, the food that people are eating, 60% of it is ultra processed. It's causing obesity, chronic disease, all kinds of health issues, which I'm sure you're very aware of. But how do we change the narrative? So I think you and I are in violent agreement, and the farmers that you work with, that this is kind of the right path to head down from an agricultural standpoint. But how do we get the end user more interested in basically the consumer in buying these products, asking for these products, and not eating the way they're eating today, whether it be a fast food or some of these other packaged products that are not good for them? How do we change people's behaviors, I guess?
Yeah. First of all, we have to start by acknowledging that the chronic disease epidemic in this country can be traced back to a direct reflection of a broken ecosystem. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to come to grips that how we farm has a direct impact on human health outcomes. We have to accept that. And we need to get the consumer more engaged in agriculture. So 100 years ago, almost 98% of the population was in some way involved in the agricultural process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 100 years ago, everyone participated in farming in some way, shape, or form. It's how we lived. And today, less than 1% of our population is involved in agriculture, right?
Yeah.
So 1% of our population has become reliant on the other 99. And I always tell people, I just get super practical with people. When people ask me, Jeff, what can I do to change that course in our society?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, get to know a farmer. Every human being in our society should have a relationship with at least one person in their community that's stewarding soil and growing healthy, delicious, organic food. That should not be a weird thing. We should embrace farmers in our community and we should support them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to, if we want to fix our healthcare crisis in this country, we have to go further upstream, and we have to start by fixing agriculture.
I agree. And getting to know your farmers. I mean, farmers markets are everywhere. In Northeast Ohio, there's a farmers market every day in a city, probably within 30 miles of where you live. So there's really, I go to a farmers market every Saturday because that's the most convenient for me. But you can go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and go to a farmers market. So,
and if you can't, I always tell people, look for regional food, regional grocery chains that are keeping food dollars in the community.
mm-hmm.
Here where I live in southeastern Pennsylvania, there's a 8-store grocery chain called Kimberton.
Mm-hmm.
And their founder prides himself with keeping millions of dollars in the county where his store is located. So he's sourcing from farmers within the county. Mm-hmm. During the pandemic, when every other national grocery chain had bare shelves, my grocery store, Kimberton, was a thriving business. He never missed a beat because he built a regional supply chain.
Mm. Yeah, we've got one place in Cleveland. The gentleman actually went to business school here in Cleveland at Case. And then when he graduated, he kind of started looking at the problem we're talking about here. So he started sourcing products, vegetables and meat products from kind of local regenerative farmers. Everything was grass-fed, et cetera. And then he eventually opened up a grocery store in Cleveland. And then he started buying the farms for his produce. So now he's kind of he's got a full supply chain in place for what he's offering to consumers.
Well, there you go. There's one more example.
Which is fantastic. So another problem in the kind of the context of what we're talking about here. So people that want to go to farmers markets that live in, I'll say suburbia and have cars, transportation, they can get to all the places. We're talking about they can go visit a farmer, they can go to a farmer's market, et cetera. But there are places in the U.S., more than I care to mention, that are basically food deserts. They can't find fresh vegetables within miles of where they live. And they would not have a car. They have to use public transportation. So that's kind of the genesis for one of the reasons we're trying to kind of create the Center in East Cleveland, is to try to bring education and kind of fresh food into these areas. But what are your thoughts on kind of changing, because those people, not only do they not have access, they also have more health problems, they have higher medical bills, there's all kinds of issues associated with those neighborhoods that really aren't even being talked, in my opinion, not being talked enough about.
Yeah, well, first of all, that's where we have to engage our state departments of agriculture. I have to give significant recognition to the Pennsylvania Department of Ag, which is our partner here where Rodale is based, and the work of Secretary Russell Redding. He's an incredible leader. I think his work should be shown off on a national stage for what he's done, but he's put huge investments into urban agriculture and, again, building a more resilient regional food system. There are other examples that we can point toward where our state departments of ag are working to solve for food insecurity in these food deserts. And we need to invest in urban agriculture. Another great case study for us to point to is the work of Dr. Stephen Chen in Alameda County. And he's built one of the first and most successful produce prescription plans in the United States, where he's actually worked with the insurance companies in the state of California to be able to do produce prescriptions and actually deliver fresh organic food to some of the most impoverished and at-risk patients in Alameda County. So there's countless examples of change happening. We need to look at those success stories and adopt those models in other parts of the United States because they're scalable.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on encouraging more people to cook healthy at home? I mean, based on kind of the way you're living and the organization you belong to and kind of our conversation, or you're doing that. But a lot of people will say, well, I don't have time. I've got kids, I've got school, I've got after school activities. Easiest thing to do is go through a drive-through versus I really don't have time to cook a healthy meal at home, because everybody thinks if you're buying something fresh, you got to break it down, you got to, do something with it. You can't do it in a timely manner, which I disagree with, by the way, but that's kind of the premise you hear a lot from parents.
Yeah. I would say that I'd say that the deepest wound in our society is our loss of connection. Part of my mission, my personal mission in life, is what I like to say that I want to reconnect humans with the earth. And what I mean by that is let's get people re-engaged with nature and food and where our food comes from and how that food was produced. I think that is the antidote to most, if not all, of society's problems today, is that we've lost our connection to source. Source being food. And food, I believe, could be the great healer, the great uniter of our time. We all eat, presumably 3 times a day. And we all rely on farmers to do that. And so I think at a time of great divide and political unrest, this is something we all can agree on, that food matters. And so I think we need, as a society, to spend more time in the kitchen, more time on farms, more time around a table without devices and electronics, connecting with one another and with the earth. I think that is the great awakening that we're beginning to live through. And thanks to you and many other leaders, we're beginning to illuminate a new path forward, and a new consciousness is emerging where people are waking up to the greatest joy, the most profoundly spiritual thing happening on this planet is our reconnection to the earth.
And by the way, all of those home cooked meals from the sources that we're talking about taste better than what you're going to get pretty much anywhere else.
We've lost our way in society because we've deprioritized food. And as we begin to prioritize it again, we will heal ourselves and we'll heal the earth. People always want to talk about the rising healthcare costs, and in 1960, for every $2 we spent on food, we only spent $1 on healthcare. Today, for every $4 we spend on healthcare, we spend $1 on food. So we've just lost our way. We've got to reprioritize food as medicine, and I think that begins the building block for a new society.
I agree. So what's next for you in the Rodale Institute? What?
It's interesting, Ken. We call ourselves a 75-year-old startup. The Institute has been unwavering and for over 7 decades doing the discipline, science, and education around organic farming. But all of a sudden, the world's caught up to what we've been espousing for a long time. And we're feeling very blessed for the moment we find ourselves in. There's a lot of demand on our work right now. We're working with some of the biggest food companies in the world. Companies like General Mills are calling Rodale and asking for our help to work with farmers in their supply chain. So I'm very hopeful. Rodale is embarking on a very ambitious future. Over the next 5 years, we need to capitalize ourselves and build new buildings and infrastructure here at our main campus in Pennsylvania. We're essentially building a state-of-the-art science center, a world-class education facility and visitor center. And there's a lot of emphasis being placed on infrastructure right now. If you come to our farm, which I invite everyone listening to do, you'll have the pleasure of visiting the most gorgeous 386-acre farm, or what we call a living laboratory. But over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be constructing and reconstructing buildings that will facilitate more growth and more education and more impact.
Nice.
In addition, we're going to continue to expand regionally and move more of our work into parts of the world that need it most. So there's some exciting partnerships on the horizon. And then lastly, Rodale has its doors wide open to partners at any land grant that want to partner with us to begin advancing regenerative organic agriculture in higher education and academia. So in many ways, we're building the University of Regenerative Organic Farming.
So how do we get you in Ohio here? You talked about Kansas. I didn't hear Ohio.
Let's go. All we need is an invitation.
All right, I'll have to figure that out. We'll add that to my list. All right, so if somebody wanted to start to become a regenerative organic farmer today, they made that decision and they want to move forward with that, what would you say would be the first step they could take to kind of move in that direction?
To contact Rodale Institute and work with one of our consultants. We'd be thrilled. Through our partnership with the through the USDA and some of the top TOPP, Transition to Organic Program, we are able to offer free services in most parts of the country. Email us. I think it's, bear with me. I think the email is consulting@rodaleinstitute.org. We'll get you to the right place.
Okay, we'll post that on the podcast as well. So this is kind of a side note, but I had a gentleman that runs an organization in Kenya reach out to me, and he's going to be on the podcast. So he is working. He says he has 1,000 farmers he has helped create regenerative farming practices in Kenya.
Who's that?
His name is Moses. So
send him our way.
I am going to mention you to him. So I'm trying to help him make some connections. I made one connection for him already here in the U.S. So
great.
All right. So recipe. So what recipe did you bring that somebody can make with a few ingredients for less than they can get a fast food meal for a family of 4?
I love this question, Ken. And actually, it took me like a half a second to think of what I would share with you, because my favorite meal, and I make it almost every Sunday in the fall through the spring, like during the wintertime, it's my favorite thing to do. But I go to my favorite poultry producer at my farmer's market. Shout out to Brian at Liberty Acres. And I buy a whole chicken. Usually Brian brings fresh chickens to the farmer's market on Sundays. And I take it home and I clean it, wash it, pat it down real dry, and 400-degree oven, and just stuff that with whatever you want. So usually it's lemons, onions, garlic, fresh herbs. You could even chop up additional vegetables like carrots and celery and potatoes and put those on the base, and then set the chicken on top of that and pop that whole thing into the oven for about 2 hours. And now you have about food for the rest of the week. So normally that becomes the Sunday dinner, and then the leftovers become lunch throughout the week. And then you can take that chicken carcass and boil it down and make bone broth. So that whole process is probably under $30. You're now between 5 and 8 meals are made from just that one chicken.
Wow. Nice. Very nice. Sounds like what we're going to do for Thanksgiving. We're going to get a fresh turkey from a farm a couple of miles from here and kind of follow that same process. And I'm going to look forward to all those leftovers for a week too. So,
cool.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show today. Any final words you want to leave our listeners with?
To join Rodale Institute in Healing the Earth, I would encourage everyone listening to follow us on social media at Rodale Institute. As a nonprofit, mission-driven organization, we rely on funding, private funding, and this is a very critical moment in our history. So we need everyone that believes in this work to support this work. And I believe that where your treasure is, your heart will be also. So as people support our work, we're going to create a better world together. And so I encourage you to consider funding Rodale. You could donate on our website and join us. And by doing that, you'll opt in to all of our news and private events, and all kinds of benefits come along with supporting the organization. So we encourage you to join today.
Very nice. All right. Well, thank you. And one of the other things we've been posting on the podcast and on my website is a link to, if you want to know what local fresh fruits and vegetables are available in your area, that's actually got a pull down by state and by month, beginning in November, end of November, and it'll kind of list out what's fresh in your area, no matter what state you live in the country. So you just know what's local and fresh that you can buy, wherever you're doing your shopping. So that's something we've added to the podcast as well. So, all right. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Ken. Pleasure to speak with you today. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you again.
All
Have
right,
a
keep
great
up the
day.
great work.
To close out today's show, I wanted to mention our sponsor, Cleveland Kitchen, easy gut health with 2 forkfuls a day. They're the leader in the fresh fermented foods category. Try Cleveland Kitchen's crunchy and delicious krauts, kimchi, and pickles packed with probiotics to support your gut health while elevating your meals from ordinary to extraordinary. Cleveland Kitchen, where taste meets wellness. Find it in the produce or deli section of your local grocery retailer or visit clevelandkitchen.com for more information.